Call this meeting to order. And we'll start by doing a little attendance, and we'll start with Mr. Dunbar.
Forrest Dunbar.
Barbara Jones. Dee Ennis.
David Nesbitt.
Julia Tucker.
Kent Carlson.
Lisa Slusner.
Dennis Wheeler.
Jack.
Lee Peterson.
Jackie Yeagle.
Amanda Moser.
All right, thank you. Glad everyone could make it today. The first thing we have on our agenda is the Code of Ethics Rewrite, high-level update. And I'm looking forward to this. You have the floor.
So what we have provided to you is an accumulation of about 6 months worth of pretty intensive work from the Board of Ethics. And I would give a tremendous amount of credit to Deputy Municipal Attorney Dee Ennis, who has really focused a lot of her time on this. I would also add, too, this is an accumulation of work, including Julia Tucker from the Assembly. She has had a significant impact and attended most all of our meetings in this rewrite. And so it's been an accumulation of a lot of time, a lot of effort from a lot of different people to essentially reduce 55 pages to 15 pages. And this is, as Julia just mentioned, if we were to put this on 2 sides of a piece of paper, it's even shorter than that, depending on how you want to calculate the number of pages. But this is a significant effort on our part. It reminds me of Ernest Hemingway used to say, I'm sorry the letter's so long, I didn't have enough time to write a shorter one. So we have put a lot of work into summarizing a lot of things to make it this size. For the committee's, just to note for the committee's information, a lot of the previous code was summarized into one section rather than 3 separate sections. Municipal employees, elected officials, appointed officials were essentially combined into these sections. I don't think, and we made a special effort too in cutting a lot of this stuff out, not to forget certain important sections, and we included those in there. A lot of the sections in here are literally word for word from the original code, and a lot of them have been completely redrafted. And again, with the input of everybody involved. Is there anything that I missed, Dee?
No.
This is a quick summary. There are some definition sections that we will, I think there are some provisions in the definitions that we have still to provide. Because I think this is a shortened list that we may want to add some more definitions from the original code.
Okay.
This is internally consistent for us, mostly, as far as capitalization, italics, things like that. That needs to be conformed to fit in the code. We don't pretend that this is a final draft that way. But as far as substance goes, I think this is a complete and final draft from our board. That there's nothing else really that needs to be done before being provided to you for your consideration. And I expect that the formatting, things like that, will be done prior to any work session that you may call for the Assembly. So as far as we're concerned, we are handing this ball into your court, and it is for yours to consider now.
All right.
It is no longer on our agenda anymore.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So then we need to schedule a meeting of this committee and the Board of Ethics for a total go through in detail. And did you want to send out an email to everyone to see when dates are available? Or?
Lisa and I can work together to arrange between the 2 bodies the best time.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the plan going forward then.
Good.
And thank you for all your work. I heard on Friday you were doing a marathon session.
We did. We finished off this morning.
Well, great. Well, we had a little leftover lunch we sent over to you. We thought maybe a little nourishment would get you through the day.
Coffee. Coffee did quite well. Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Julia, thank you very much. I can see your handwriting in here. I see de minimis on the second page, so I know you've been here.
It was very rewarding to have the ethics board invite me and Dee to come down, because that doesn't always happen. And as Lisa Toussaint said, how great is that? Something that you started with the assembly here is your sort of turning out, which I am, that I have an opportunity to work on a revision that was just so delightful to have the feedback and the engagement of so many interested people, which we, as Ted remembers from before, we didn't have that when we were first going in. Ted and I both worked with Ken Stout, but we really didn't have the depth of understanding or experience from the then ethics board as we have now, and also people like Forrest have brought in questions, and new members bring in questions, and those things have been, the board has been made aware of those, and some priorities of yours that have been incorporated so that we could have a more living, breathing, working document going forward. So,
Well, thanks to the board for all your work on there. I know I talked to you guys a couple times, and thank you for taking the effort and getting this done for us. Now it'll be in our ballpark to deal with. Thank
Yeah,
you.
just to add to that, I would note too that things, not only the body of work that we've been accumulating as a board, we've been able to incorporate a lot of those things that we saw coming up to try to address certain provisions, certain anomalies in the first draft or the first code. We try to address those, and questions that came up from the assembly members, we tried to address those too in here, and you'll see them. I mean, yeah, I know from Forrest, charitable tickets to fundraisers. We tried to address anything that's come up basically in the last 10 or 15 years. We've tried to kind of make sure we covered everything, and we spent a lot of time going over and making sure, okay, well, what about that decision? Would that be covered under this? And, so it's I think it's pretty good.
If you guys look at our decision recently on whether a person can participate in discussion if they're growing marijuana or selling marijuana, we've been dealing with this issue over the members. That is not only cultivated, but it's also not going to be a dealer. And so trying to figure out,
Retailing, I think, is the correct.
whatever it is, it's a retailer. So the question is, how do we deal with that? I mean, right now he can't vote on anything that deals with either one of those two areas. But it's something we're going to have to deal with because you're going to have more people potentially on the body to get into that. So do we have the ability within this document to deal with it?
I would say that we do, and then maybe a more specific question can be addressed under a specific provision. But I would say that we do, if I were to throw it out there.
Well, I think the rules are still pretty general.
That's right.
So that would come in under a letter of opinion, or, I mean, and really the assembly did what they needed to do. They brought it here, and then you really gave it some thought. So I think there's still more general guidance on that particular issue.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Training. I just happen to think of a question. We were discussing one of the meetings in the last year, the need to be a change so that elected officials could go to social events without having to notice those events. And sometimes community councils, there's 4 of us end up at community councils. And so was that covered in the rewrite?
No, this isn't really a public meetings code, though. I think that's more of a public meetings issue.
Oh, okay.
This does say it's not a gift if you go to those type of organizations, that's no longer a problem.
In the gift
terms of
section, we've
free
addressed
tickets
certain, tickets, things like that. We've addressed that in the gift section.
Okay,
That's really an open meetings act issue.
Right.
State level.
okay, all right.
And we've also carved out areas where we've said specifically this doesn't apply. That is not a jurisdiction. That's a jurisdictional issue for another code provision or something.
Okay. All right, fine. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let's get moving forward and have an update on our 2017 election.
May we be excused? And we'll free
Yeah.
up some seats for you all.
Certainly-
Thank you, guys.
Certainly can. Thank you. Appreciate you. Well, yeah,
It's for me to
you
state
can read
things.
15 pages and kind of have an idea what you read, but the other one,
Are you sticking around? Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Squeeze me in here too.
Well, we
I guess we're doing pizza
Yes.
break.
Sorry.
Say goodbye.
Be in the middle? So
No, I'm good here. I'm gonna say this way,
Wherever
so
you,
we
I was
can.
trying to figure out the
Yeah.
best place for you.
That's it. My left eye doesn't work. This is good. My right eye can see everything. I'm just gonna
I'm
sit.
still believing that. Individually
Oh. Yeah.
We're gonna schedule a joint
Forget
meeting.
about those things.
Yeah, I know.
That was just a high level, we're gonna go line by line at a time. Today is supposed to be mostly about the vote by mail. I have to leave at like 1:30 sharp, so, or whenever we're done, because I have to get to, I'm going to take a tour of Aspen. The sewage facility.
I hear that's some good stuff there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've been trying to schedule a time for a month or so.
So these right here we need to pass out. There should be sets of a matrix and then the ordinance behind it. And there should be one extra matrix floating around for Barbara because it was on the table.
Oh, okay, and
But you grabbed the ordinance, so.
More sets here.
Amanda stole your matrix.
Is there an extra matrix floating around?
I'm
It
accusing
was on
you
the
without.
table, but that's all right.
Oh,
No,
no.
here,
bunch of
let me
it.
give it
Matrix at the end there?
What is?
No, that is full.
Because they were thinking that there was an
That's right.
extra.
Well,
Okay,
maybe Mr. Trainee needs that. Does he have the
Does he have
ordinance
it
down?
all set?
He's all set?
okay, good.
All right, so hopefully the matrix will help you as a shortcut to get to different issues, but I want to kind of walk you through. I've check marked some provisions in here I want to draw your attention to specifically with basically two goals in mind. One, to see if the committee will basically push this out as a committee version to the assembly, and two, to addressing issues you see coming or that you want to address that I haven't already touched on, and so we can incorporate those as we move it to the assembly level for introduction. So one issue in here that I have not spent a lot of time on, but you'll see a placeholder for it, and that's the criminal provisions. They're in Title 28 under Title 28-200, which is not in this packet because I haven't made any changes to it, but a number of jurisdictions do sort of add on to their criminal provisions in the election scenario to address vote by mail, any sort of mail fraud type issues, or trying to submit multiple ballots through the mail, that sort of thing. And we have some provisions that you'll see on the first page that are in Title 14, which is just basically minor citations, right, that the hearing officer hears and assigns a fine of $75. There's other provisions that make some of the offenses misdemeanors. And so it may be that the current code covers that issue well enough. If you want to hear more about that, I can certainly address that separately. I didn't see a lot that necessarily needed to be updated unless you felt like as a body you wanted to sort of enhance that to add a certain amount of well, how would I say it? It's, gravitas or severity to vote by mail, just to discourage people from thinking about playing with vote by mail process differently than they might in a polling situation. So we can add a misdemeanor provision for attempts to knowingly vote more than once and things like that that aren't currently in code. But I typically piggyback on what I've seen from other jurisdictions, and most of it could be handled here at the municipal prosecutor's level as misdemeanor offenses.
I think we do. You want us to go through you? Either of you, I'll go however we need to. But yeah, I think even if it's probably covered or 95% covered, making a very clear statement of it, because there's going to be people very suspicious of it. And if our explanation is, well, we think maybe it's already, punished criminally, I don't think that'll be sufficient. For some people, nothing will be sufficient, but I think we ought to, and we very clearly articulated that it is a crime. All we can do is misdemeanors, though, right? We don't have any felony authority.
Right. But what you can do is you can put those in, and then you can kind of direct municipal resources in terms of what deserves more enforcement and what doesn't, right, at the misdemeanor level. If you had a felony issue, you could refer that to the state. The state may or may not take it as a case.
I don't think there'll be much, but I think I don't want to give speaking for myself, I don't want to give an opening to people who are already suspicious of it. So yeah, I'd like it to be very crystal clear.
Okay.
Okay, great. Mr. Trainer?
Dennis, you were talking about misdemeanors. We squared those misdemeanors with SB 91. I want to make sure that there's still a misdemeanor, because I know that changed a lot of things around.
Yeah, I'll double check that to see, yeah. I don't recall anybody talking about changes to election-related offenses in that, but I'll definitely check it.
You check it.
Yeah. The other thing I would note is that you'll see a lot of provisions in here that are sort of set up so that we're adding in vote by mail to the existing vote through polling location language. Now, eventually, you may, after a little bit of experience, you may want to clean this up because, for example, a lot of the poll location type voting language in here you may want to remove. You won't need it anymore. So this is in some ways sort of a transitional document versus a complete replace of voting by poll. I think I would anticipate a cleanup after one or two election cycles where we know for certain we're never going back, and then we can just clean that up and pull it out and condense it. So this makes Title 28 a little thicker than it needs to be, but I think it's the right thing to do in a transitional setting.
It's a good step in this, because I don't think we're ever going back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
Plus, after we do an election or two, we may see some things that we want to change, to improve it. And so we may have to update the code a little bit.
exactly. Okay, with that, I want to jump into things that I've highlighted, and along the way, if you see something that catches your eye and you want to ask a question about it, feel free to jump in. So the first thing that I've noted is on page 4, section C at the top. Now, typically a mayoral runoff race is the first Tuesday in May, but we want to add in some flexibility here because the turnaround time to build the ballot and get the mail house package ready and mailed out adds a little time potentially can add a little time compared to a traditional poll-based runoff where you're printing the ballots and getting those delivered. And Amanda.
Just to sort of build on what Dennis was saying, we had a robust conversation about, we've been very fortunate that when we have been triggered to go into a runoff, it hasn't been close between the candidates. It's been very clear on election night, the two candidates that are going to go into runoff. But we sort of were playing with the scenario of what if we weren't able to determine based on the votes that were tallied by election night, and what if it took a couple more days, and how could that impact us? And we spent some time looking at the calendar, and we recognized that in the unlikely event that we couldn't make that determination within a couple days after the election, that timeline of a month is a really close timeline. Anyways, Barbara and I can tell you from 2015, there was 3 weeks where we were in the middle of 2 elections. We were still trying to close out the regular election, but we were full speed ahead into the runoff election, and that timeline is really close. And on the flip side of that, we're really aware that if we push the runoff out too far in May, we can have the potential of losing engagement. It's getting into summer and people just might not be around. So we wanted flexibility to address both those concerns, and I think Dennis's suggestion really captured both those. We would like to keep it the first Tuesday, but recognizing that we could be in a scenario where it's too tight or too close to call. And Alaska is the land of close elections.
We know that.
So you only gave yourself the out of 1 week, though.
Correct.
Which we think is sufficient time based on looking. I mean, we spent a long time looking at the calendar and understanding from other jurisdictions when we would be able to determine it. I think we would, by Friday after the election, probably have the truest sense of the top 2 candidates. So we felt very comfortable with just an extra week.
I suppose this situation presented itself even not in vote by mail, that if it's that the potential was there if the second place, whatever, anyway, if you can't tell the top 2. Okay, so if you think a week is enough, that's great.
We were very thankful in 2015 that it was really clear right away.
Right.
The next section I'd like to draw your attention to is on page 6. It's the second half of that page, 283030, Declaration of Candidacy. In order to accommodate vote by mail, we've moved these dates a little bit, and I think we discussed this last time the committee met about moving the dates. So you'll see that we've opened the declaration a little earlier, and we close it a little earlier so we can get the ballot development started a little bit earlier. I think what we did is we moved everything a week. Amanda, did you have any add-on for that? No. Okay. Pretty straightforward, but obviously it'll be of interest to people, and it'll be something we'll have to make sure that gets well advertised, if you will, if the Assembly chooses to adopt that. So the next one I want to draw your attention to is at the bottom of page 8. And this is the timelines for getting the ballots out to the voters. And at the bottom of page 10, it's 284020, where we make sure that the clerk has the ballots in possession on that 21st day. They're mailed out that 21st day. And so voters will have 21 days to fill out their ballot and return it, or get it in the mail.
Postmarked ballots that are received afterwards are valid until when?
Until the opening of the public session of cabinets, I believe is what we said. So the public session usually opens when? After the election day?
Thursday evening.
Second Thursday after the election.
9 days, not 2 days.
Well, it actually says the Friday, but second Friday after the election, but we always hold it on Thursday. And
Okay, but not the direct one,
exactly, that's
Yeah.
line
the,
instead of two, yeah.
yeah.
That are received at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
They have to be
Postmarked election day.
Yeah.
And we find even in our current system, with about 3,000 voters out vote by mail, we receive the bulk of stuff before election day. We receive a large amount on election day, and it really dwindles quickly. I think sort of the last stuff that's still eligible, we usually receive Friday, and we do receive stuff after that, but it's usually postmarked outside of election day. So
Are you allowed to start counting before election day?
In this code, we are allowed to start scanning the ballots, but no official tabulation is put out until after the polls close election night.
So does this mean potentially we could have a much larger, the moment the polls close, there's that first rush to me, that it'll be a bigger
Yeah, based on what we've seen in other counties, and Amanda can speak to this, but usually the big flux of ballots comes the day before election day and the day of election day. That's when people go, oh yeah, it's just like kind of like filing your tax return or making your PFD application. There's a big rush right there at the deadline. So yeah, we anticipate there'll be a big flood of ballots received those 2 days.
but not just received, but also counted. So
Yes.
the number that
So, if I may, what Barbara and I have seen in travels to King County and Thurston, they are receiving things, and the bulk is coming the day before and the day of election. And the way their process is set up, if they receive it the day of election, it has the ability to go through the signature verification, opening, and get scanned. They're able to do a large percentage. I think they were saying like maybe 2 to 4 hours between receiving it, that it can go through all the processes if there's no issues with the signature and there's no issues with, ballot that it can't scan. So even those stuff that is coming in on election day has, but with our system set up properly, will be able to be included in that.
Is it a good idea to scan it before it's closed? I mean, now you can't count something before, I guess you could some of the absentees, but essentially it's impossible to get an early leaked count. But there's the potential for that, isn't there?
What we've, in our exploration of other jurisdictions that are vote by mail, in order to be able to upload those results when polls close, you do need to be working ahead and tabulating those. And there's systems through the tabulation equipment that we purchased that won't allow us to get those results. So it wouldn't be possible for those results to be leaked before election day.
The way the election center will be set up is the scanning system for the ballots is not connected to the internet in any way. And you have to have a special password and thumb drive to move the results from that system over to a different computer that actually can upload the tabulated results and publish them. Yeah. So you can't see them on the first machine, and then you have to physically go to the second machine to actually password in and put the results out.
Be like Mission Impossible.
And our code prohibits that until after the polls close, or in this case, what is called the elections close at 8 p.m. on election day.
Well, so, yeah, and I believe it, but really it was impossible before, and now it is technologically prohibited, but
Yes, that's true.
possible.
And the trade-off is we could not scan any ballots until the
But then
polls
you'd be
closed.
way behind.
But then your results wouldn't come out till the next day. And I don't know that the public would be too excited about that option.
Don't do that.
Dennis, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, there are two separate machines. They're not linked.
Right, so the scanning setup right now is going to be 3 scanners, 3 computers. So you have several workers that are scanning the ballots, and the ballot scanners run, I don't know, forget the rate. let's say it's
18,000.
200 a minute or some
Yeah.
crazy number. That's all a separate system from actually tabulating the results and being able to publish them out.
Neither one of them's on the internet of any.
The one that will publish, that can publish out, can be connected to the internet,
But the other one can't.
but the internal system, we won't do it. No.
Thank you.
Okay. What's next, Dennis?
Let's see. Did I cover that one? So the next check mark is at the bottom of page 11. This is the hours for the polls being opened. And I put in a provision here for the accessible vote centers. You may recall we discussed having 3 centers where people can go and get a replacement ballot if they've lost or accidentally destroyed their original ballot. They can get special assistance if they need help voting, those sorts of things. And what we've done is set up that these shall be open 7 days in advance so that people can get services during that time frame.
But far fewer of them. These polling locations are like
Yeah,
just a couple.
These are fancier in that they have more services available than a typical polling location would be.
Yeah, these are voting centers.
Yeah, exactly.
How many of them?
Planning on 3.
3, yeah.
Have you thought of locations yet?
There has been some discussion about location. Yeah, City Hall is always available. That wouldn't even necessarily need to be called specifically a vote center, but the election center, where we hopes to have a public counter, and then the other locations.
Lusac Library,
Library.
probably, that's a good location for the public. And that would be 3.
Wait, say
And
it again?
City Hall, the new election center, Lusac Library, and that would be 3.
Where's the new election center?
It's, yeah, Ship Creek.
Why have? Here you go.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. They're just sort of close to each other, right? I mean, yeah, I guess it's fine. It doesn't really matter.
We've discussed other options and we'll be continuing to do that. We continue to look at numbers where people are voting. We are trying to be as diverse as possible. We've done a really good job with the drop boxes. We have 2 of those in each assembly district is the idea. So
Center, but a drop box.
I think the other part of the conversation is that we are really encouraging voters to vote by mail.
Right.
And that the accessible vote center is, should there be challenges, but there's also other means to address those challenges. Voters can contact us through our call center and we can resend ballots and stuff like that. We are really encouraging folks to use the system of vote by mail. And in our exploration of other jurisdictions that are vote by mail, the vote centers are not utilized because the residents are using the vote by mail system. And so that is something that we really are going to use in our messaging and encourage voters to take advantage of the convenience of vote by mail.
Mr. Chairman, managed the first time they did this, they saw a lot of people going to the help centers, but after that, progressively, there's less people going there.
It's been a little bit different jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I think some have seen more usage of the vote centers, but others haven't. I spent Election Day 2015 in King County, and their main vote center was in their election center, and I didn't see a voter in there all day long.
Good.
Amazing.
Okay,
Okay.
next page, bottom of page 12. as you know, you're not allowed to electioneer at polling locations, within 200 feet. So there's a similar provision here for the drop boxes, and I put it at 50 feet, so it's substantially less. I was trying to sort of balance, this notion that sidewalks are a traditional place to exercise your free speech rights, your First Amendment rights. And these drop box locations spread out through the city, taking off 200 feet. It's easier when you get to schools, but some of these other ones are going to be, who knows where they'll end up. So I said 50 feet. 50 feet isn't huge, and if the problem develops, you can come back and tweak this, but that's just my arbitrary, so to speak, pick for a distance.
Mr. Gilmore?
I should say I borrowed that from another jurisdiction.
Okay,
So
that's
it's
good to know.
not entirely arbitrary.
So I have two thoughts on this. The first is, that does seem actually really close to me. 50 feet is not nearly as long as people think.
Right.
That's the length of a fishing boat. So I would be in favor of 100 feet. Because we are putting these mostly at schools, right?
Yes.
Which used to be polling places, so people are used to not being able to electioneer near the schools during elections. The second point, this is unrelated. Sorry, chocolate bar. So there's a state law that's been proposed this session to eliminate Alaska's ban on ballot selfies, and I want to make sure that none of our electioneering language compounds that. That is to say, people like to take pictures of their ballots and put them on social media. There are studies that show that encourages young people to vote because they see that their friends are voting. And I want to make sure that nothing we do here criminalizes ballot selfies.
So this ordinance doesn't change what's currently on the books, so you may want to look at it, because I believe what's in here is the current law, which doesn't allow you to display your ballot. So if you want to make a change to that, we would need to. I haven't proposed any changes as part of vote by mail, but there is that restriction that's from the current code.
Okay.
The problem with taking pictures of ballots would be that somebody would get a picture of someone else's ballot and put it online.
Well, that's true too.
And that obviously would not be kosher.
But so I support the prohibition. This is how the state law is going to shake out if this state law passes. In a ballot area, you can't wave your ballot around. And you can't show it to the election official. You can't show it to other voters. But if you take a picture of it and put it online, in a way you can think of, well, they just showed it to everybody in that area. Or you could say, no, they just put it online. And I think if we try to, I think it clearly violates the First Amendment if we try to prohibit the second thing. So I'm not sure, I'm just thinking through like how that would interact with our code with these spread out around. But
So vote by mail, your opportunity to influence other people in the act of voting would be sort of at home, right? That's not an issue really. But at the Accessible Vote Center, if you're getting voting help there, there's potential a voter could show off their ballot in some way. But other than that, that's really it.
Is there information?
Oh, no, that's not true, because, because even if they fax or email file, it's the election officials that see it, but they're under close rules to maintain the privacy of that to the extent they can.
And the voter waives that.
Yeah.
I think one thing to consider with the 50 feet, sort of the original discussion point here, the drop boxes are placed in areas where mostly people in vehicles can drive up to. And so the idea is that you are approaching this and you've already voted. You're not sort of sitting down and voting. And so I think maybe that's why jurisdictions do have less space, and and there are sort of in these a lot of the schools are in neighborhoods, and this is sort of a battle we have every year with these polling locations that are neighborhoods next to somebody's house, and we're out measuring 200 feet, moving signs to 201 feet. But I think one thing to consider is that it's a 50 feet, and it's sort of like a courtesy, so you don't have things right in front of you. But voters are typically going to be approaching this and have already voted and just looking to put it into the drop box.
And we're, Mr. Train?
Yes, I'd be more comfortable with 100 feet. I'm thinking of Airport Heights. We traditionally have problems with the homes that are that close to the schools. And she's right about going and moving the signs. I'd be more comfortable starting off with 100 feet.
100 feet isn't actually that far.
So here is what I think is one of the problems. I think like signs are one issue, but because these are on the sidewalk near a parking area where people are driving, it means bumper stickers. And so unfortunately, the clerk's office has had to tell people, or we have covered bumper stickers in the parking lot back here. And so in certain areas, I am slightly concerned that like UAA, who is being courteous and allowing us to put a drop box at the Alaska Airlines Center, if we go 100 feet, that means someone has to be checking cars out there to make sure that they don't have a bumper sticker on, and then we're going to have to tell them to move their car. I'm not sure how we're going to find them, or if we're going to go tape over the bumper stickers. That is why I would suggest 50 feet is better. There's probably 50 feet between the drop box and the.
You'll pick up a few cars.
Right, but not a whole bunch.
If you happen to know that big parking lot at Alaska Airlines, there's a pay station closer to the building. And this will be right next to that pay station. So you'll pick up a few cars in that first bay.
Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Holman has a truck, big truck. He put signs for candidates he's supporting, mine, his, whoever, when we run elections. He parks that everywhere. Conceivably, he could park that within 50 feet of this, and it would tell you who to vote for.
And it would be a violation.
I know, but I'd like it 100 feet. I don't want it within 50 feet of it.
Well, the thing is, the sign is big enough, whether it's 50 or 100 feet, you're still going to see it.
I know, but I'd rather have it far away as I can put it.
I just want to echo and sort of build on what Barbara's saying, and just to consider this is something that's very challenging for the clerk's office to enforce, which is another sort of thing to consider with the 50 feet. And just to remind the members that yes, there could be a sign that's close to it, but most of the voters are going to be approaching it with voted ballots already ready to go sign, instead of sort of sitting there and voting. But we use a lot of resources on election day going around covering up signs, and that's with 122. It's just a very challenging thing, and we're going to have these boxes out for weeks leading up to the election, and a lot of staff resources to be managing this, and something to consider to actually enforce it is going to be challenging.
I mean, you got to have a real good reason to restrict First Amendment rights. And the courts are pretty jealous of it, and I think we do when everybody has to come here to vote, and you want that to be a place where you can, so everybody has to come there, they're making that decision then, and it justifies this larger thing. But when it's dropped down, that is, you're not making the decision there, and most people are doing it by regular mail, but some are doing it here, you're just dropping it off. I'm worried about the bumper sticker. I'm worried, we're sign wavy candidates for whatever reason in this town. That's a thing. And so you're at busy corners, likely busy corners where you might want to put, or near where you might want to put, things where cars can drop these off. And it just seems like the thing we're protecting against is much less worrisome than it was before, when you and I have to go there to vote, and I have to run a gauntlet of people trying to convince me, versus I'm just dropping off. So I appreciate that you went down from 200. That's absolutely right. So we'll think about more of this 50 versus 100, but it clearly shouldn't be too.
All right, Mr. Trainee.
Most Alaskans do things the very last minute. They're going to be coming up there, rather than dropping off, they're going to be filling it in and then putting it in the mailbox. That's how Alaskans are. We wait till the very last minute.
Maybe you're right.
We're trying to encourage people to vote at their kitchen tables, though.
So your spouse can tell you how to vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dennis?
Next item, page 13, near the bottom. Person's not in register. That's section 19, 2850 80B. If a person's name does not appear in the voter registration database, the person may only vote a question ballot. So the idea here is we don't maintain our own voter registration system. We get the state's system and load it into our system. We get the state's information. So the state maintains it. They do a purge right on top of our election. So we're trying to work with the state so we can get that purge synced up. So maybe the records we get and the mail out that we do is as accurate as we can get it based on their purge. But there's always going to be, I think, for the foreseeable future, the potential for incorrect data, right? Where somebody just doesn't show up, but they should have. And in that scenario, we're still going to let them vote. We'll go through the process of vetting their qualifications to vote. They'll get to vote a question ballot. So this just calls that out, that even in vote by mail, if we can't verify their eligibility, we'll go through a process of doing this. And it may be that they come into a vote center and there's a problem, we let them vote a question ballot. They mail in a ballot and there's an issue, or we have a process for resolving that with them as well.
Great.
Replacement ballots. This is page 15, right in the middle. Subsection B, there's a paragraph there about replacement ballots. The idea is something could happen during the mail process, or you spill coffee like Amanda did in some of our test situations, where there's a problem. And the voter can still get a replacement ballot. You know, if you're at a polling location and you screw up, you basically you present that screwed up ballot to the election official. They're going to give you a new ballot, tear up the old one. Here, you can ask for a new ballot. Depending on the timing, maybe you get one in the mail if there's enough time, or maybe you have to come down to the accessible vote center to pick one up and exchange it, or maybe it's so last minute that we're going to do some sort of email or fax with you. Somehow or another, we're going to make that possible through one of these processes, and the system will help us because we log in that information, so it knows now there's two ballots out there, and it's going to take the first one received. So in a scenario where somebody forgets that they voted or attempts to get a second ballot in, the system is designed so we log that record so that when the ballots come back in, we know that there's a problem if we now get two.
How many times can the voter do this?
You know, some places had restrictions. We talked about saying no more than 3 or 4 times, but we ended up just dropping that provision for now. If it becomes a problem, then we can address it. Right now, with the system designed to just take the first one received, not the first one sent, but the first one received, we're going to work with that.
Well, you know, I actually accidentally got some information last summer when I was out for pizza one night. A gentleman from had worked for the Department of Elections in the state of Oregon when they switched to vote by mail. And so we were just in the beginning of starting all this at that time. And so I told him, well, what was the most surprising thing to you when they had the first election? He said the number of people that asked for additional ballots because they spoiled the first one, spilled stuff, dogs ate it, kids tore it up, whatever. He said that he was blown away. It was like 2%, more than 2%. So we have to be ready for that.
If you receive 2, is that a crime? I mean, if I say I lost it and then you get my original and my replacement, I see what happens in terms of the election counting.
Yeah.
What happens in terms of anything else?
Do you want to answer that one? Because
Ms. Bolger?
Okay, so what I was thinking to propose for the criminal part was if you knowingly attempt to vote twice, right? That's a crime. If you're somebody who's just forgetful, maybe you have Alzheimer's, I don't know, but you do it, but with no intent. We're only counting the first one. We're not going to do anything more than that. But if we get the sense that somebody's really trying to manipulate the system, then it deserves some sort of investigation to see what's going on there. So that's kind of how I was approaching that question.
And we do see voters each year who vote twice, and you know, and they like vote early, and they vote like the first week, and then they vote around election day, and so you know we look at each of them each time it happens, and we have in the past just made the decision to count the first one, but we recognize that it is something that happens. We have received calls from voters who voted and then changed their mind and tried to vote again. And so we do count the first one, but that is something that happens pretty regularly, and especially when people vote early and then, you know, controversial things come out closer to the election. So that is something that we've seen. And it's interesting too about Dennis's with the talking about restricting the number of ballots. State of Alaska has in their statutes that it's limited to 3. And it's one of the small areas where our code differs from the state statute. And it's an interesting area that we discuss every year in training because it comes up. All of the workers are trained at the state of Alaska. Most of our workers work for both elections. So
To stop at 3?
so that it comes up every year. We talk about it and we say, you know, at the state you do have to stop at 3, but we don't have that provision in our code. So if somebody, and then I ask them every time, have you ever had anyone ask for more than 3? And it's not something that happens. It's sort of an interesting placeholder. When we redid our code rewrite in 2013 and 14, we talked about it. And to me, if I tell someone they can't have a 4th ballot, it's almost like I'm telling them they can't vote. And so I didn't want to include that into our code. But we train our election workers that if somebody is having challenges that require them to get more than 2 ballots, as an election official, you can ask them if they need assistance. You can offer them a sample ballot. There's a lot of other opportunities to assist the voter. So it's not something that we're seeing, but
Mr. Training?
Amanda, Barbara, would you guys look at putting something there to let people know, once you've mailed your ballot, we receive what you process, that's your official ballot. You can't later change your mind and send another one in, just because people are going to try. For whatever reason, I've changed my mind, I want to vote for this person.
And
I
hopefully,
had a lady tell me, this is an elderly couple, we'll put it that way. And
How old are we talking about? Because, you know, I'm getting
considerably older than you or
Okay,
I.
thank you.
And she apologized when I came to her door. She says, because we forgot and accidentally tried to vote twice last time. And she said, we voted in by mail, absentee, and then when it came election day, we went and voted at the poll because we always had voted at the polls before,
That's what you get a lot of.
you know?
But this
And
time
so-
you can, you could actually change it. I mean, if I send in by mail, think I didn't want to do that, run down, get another ballot, and you get it first, that's the one that counts.
yes.
This for the first time has the limited opportunity to do that.
I would just add, if somebody is truly ambitious and figures that out, but I think most of them are more in the example
remember.
that Pete, they just forgot that they voted, and so the first ballot counts.
Right.
It's a pretty inefficient way to do voter fraud. I mean, it's going to affect one vote, maybe, and it's not going to get you a whole lot of.
And I guess the other way to think of this is to the extent that we scan the envelopes on a routine basis as they come in, this helps prevent that effort, right? Because we've already got that ballot in the system, and so the second one,
Just,
you're unlikely to be be able to beat that process, hopefully. The other thing, that's why the technology I think is going to be helpful here. I don't think there'll be a huge administrative burden with this compared to the amount of times it may happen. It may happen a huge amount of times. The admin effort shouldn't go up. It should go up maybe a little bit because we're going to handle them, but the system should help us with that. Should I wait for Mr. Trainee or keep going?
Let's keep
Let's
going.
keep moving, we'll run out of time.
Okay, next check mark, page 16. This is at section 2 there at the top, A, B, and C. This is directive to the voters on how to get that ballot back to us, and that we will not take packages that haven't been paid for.
COD?
Right.
Do people try that?
I would imagine.
not with our current system, but
Who knows?
it's definitely one of the big talking points that come up anytime we talk to a group about vote by mail is the cost of postage.
Because based on our prior conversations, the decision had been made that we were not going to pay for return postage. So it's up to the voter to pay for the postage or to drop it off at a drop box at this point, unless they
And that's sort of why we came up with the drop boxes. One of the reasons was so that people who were resistant to want to pay for postage had an alternative.
Right.
I like it.
Okay, the next change that I noted is on page 20. This is section 2 at the top. This relates to two guides or handbooks that we give to observers and poll watchers. We're going to update those to correspond to the vote by mail changes, and so those will be basically something that the body will be adopting by reference. And so we're working on updating those right now, and we'll include those as exhibits. Otherwise, we have to take those separately through the regulatory process, which comes to the assembly anyway. So we might as well just get it done here as part of that. So that's just a note there. The next reference is on page 23 at the top, subsection E. This is just a repeat of what's in the code in a couple other sections, and that is that we only count the first ballot. We've already talked about that. First ballot received. The next is on page 24. This is near lines 33 through 37, so it's 286050A1. Permanent absentee status. The state of Alaska doesn't have this yet. Other jurisdictions do, where you can decide, I'm a snowbird, I'm gone every April, I want it always mailed to this special address in Arizona, because that's where I am in April. And so we've just added some code here for this as a possibility if the state ultimately changes the system, so we don't have to go back and do it. Amanda?
Or if we're able to incorporate it into our system.
Right. So right now, you have to file an application every year. And this would get around having to do that. You wouldn't have to, you could just say, look, just designate me as a permanent absentee, and then you don't have to file a new application. So that'd be nice. Page 25, subsection D, certification. So right now, that absentee ballot, there's some pretty significant signature requirements, including witnessing and so forth. For vote by mail across 200,000 potential voters, we've simplified this, so you don't need all of those extra signatures. You don't need the notary, you don't need the National Guard, district judge, magistrate, whatever it is. It's your signature matched to your signature in the state's voter registration database. If you're unable to sign, and you put a mark, and you can have two witnesses. That way, if your hand's broken or so there's some other problem of a physical nature, you can still mark it, get two witnesses, and then we can work that from there. So that's what that does.
I'm sorry, I meant to ask this question.
Sure.
Just going back for just a second, the permanent absentee status for snowbirds in Arizona.
Right.
If they pass away, how many ballots will we mail them before we stop mailing them ballots?
Amanda?
It's still going to be tied to their voter registration database. So if they pass away, the state marks them as deceased, and we would no longer mail them a ballot because they're no longer a registered voter.
How does the state even know that? If they're in Arizona and they pass away, how does the state kind of?
The state reads the obituaries, and I know this because we had a voter a couple elections ago who voted absentee by mail and then passed away, and so when we were verifying them in the voter registration database, there was like XX, which means deceased, I learned, and we contacted the state, and that's what they told us. So it's like one of those.
They actually look at the obituaries versus like getting a death certificate list or something like that.
Does Eric?
Wow, what a job!
Does Eric play into this at all? I mean, does Eric help us clean up for the state?
I think when people move out of state and register in another state, if it's linked to the ERIC system, that helps us.
Mr. Craney.
I got you.
How often does the state purge their files? Because I've got a son and his wife moved out 4 years ago. And as of the election we just had, they're still on the ballot for my precinct.
The state does
And they're registered down in Washington State.
a yearly purge based on a lot of factors, and this is the Forrest keeps mentioning it's ERIC system, and it's trying to link states and their voter registration. So when somebody registers in another state, then they get removed from our whole books.
But if you left the state and didn't register somewhere else, you wouldn't get purged until I think it's 3 or 4 years later, because they look at your voting history. They're not going to purge you just because you chose not to vote, right? So
Like my son and daughter-in-law, they registered here, they voted here for years, they moved to Washington State.
yeah,
They get their ballot there in King County to vote, and they're still in our register, because I just saw their name on there. So I'm just saying, the state is not purging the way they should, because there's no way they should be on that register.
Eric, only if they register in that other state. I mean, at the end of the day, there are some people that do this, but it's not the end of the world if someone's if they're voting in another state but not the other state. Like it's
I know.
it's up to you. I mean, it's fine.
Sorry to bother you.
You get these votes every time. Why are you complaining? Your son gets to vote for you.
That's why I'm up here.
Okay, page 27. This addresses a question that I think Forrest asked earlier. This is at the top of page 27. This is parents A, B, and C at the very top. This is dealing with ballots that come in after Election Day closes, but if they've been properly postmarked and are verified, then they will be counted as long as we get them before the opening of the public session canvass.
Now I'm curious, what was the rule on death? Sorry, Mr. Chairman. So was that ballot counted? If you vote absentee and die, does it like die before the election or die afterwards, or does it matter?
The person died before the election, but they had cast their ballot.
Validly as an absentee, and so it kind of very interesting. Yeah, what?
Kind of one of their last acts. It's kind of actually cool that got to count.
Yeah.
That's why I vote early too.
In case you die, that's good thinking, you know.
How would he tell us?
That's dedication to voting.
Yeah, that's right.
I might die. That's the one thing I'm going to take care of, just in case.
I'm going to stop my mail. I mean,
Eat dessert first, life insurance, and then vote.
All right. Top of page 31. This is something we also talked about, which is at the very, very top. It says the voter can mark the signature and two other witnesses over the age of 18 can sign. This is if they can't apply their own signature, so that's there. And then at the bottom of that same page, subsection E, valid signature. This walks you through the process for validating signatures. And a particular note is on the back page, page 32, at the top. Subsection 3, A, B, C, and D. This is the criteria for identifying what is a matching signature. And the way jurisdictions do it that we've looked at, Washington, I think it is they have the state troopers provide a training class to their election officials on verifying signatures. So somebody's probably worked with FBI training for handwriting matches. So these are the criteria they look at. So you can buy an election system that lets the computer do the match. We're doing a human match so that we do this training. There's a match. If there's an issue, there's a secondary level of review. And then if there's a rejection, we notify the voter. So we'll go through this process so there's an opportunity for the voter to verify that even though the signatures are way off, the voter can still validate that that's their ballot.
for 6 months on all those stupid electronic ones that never go right, I've been signing J. Hoffa, and every credit card has run. I don't think they check those at least.
You could put a smiley face on it. And that's
It does,
it.
yeah.
They will accept the smiley face. They're not looking for your signature.
We
So my
won't
wife does a
accept
smiley
you.
face.
You want J. Hoffa? Okay, I won't do that on the ballot.
At the bottom of that same page,
J.
subsection,
Hoffa, I like that.
It's kind of dating me, though. I gotta get something else.
at the bottom of that same page, subsection F talks about if the voter returns the envelope but forgot to sign, or if it's invalid. This walks through the process I just described, where we try to get a hold of them and validate. Right.
We got this. Was this you? Here's the process to get it signed. Whatever.
Yep. Exactly.
Mr. Peterson, did you model this section off another jurisdiction?
Let me see here. Let me see if I can remember if I did or not. Partially. Yes. I don't know if some jurisdictions are a little bit more liberal, but what I do here is require them to come down and show ID.
If it's questions.
Yeah, if it's that way, there's some sort of way to validate the voter, and we have to have time to check to make sure there's more than one package as well.
So can we ask them to come in and do a signature in person just to verify the two, or?
We would like them to do that so that we could add that to the database, certainly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think what we talked about is if we have that package, we could theoretically set up so they could come and sign it if it was missing. But in absence of that, we'd like to have them sign a form, right, that they swear and affirm that's them, and then capture a signature, right, that we can then include in the database.
So we'll have to create a form.
Yeah. And then at the top of the next page, subsection F talks about multiple and replacement ballots. And again, first what received is counted. And then we take the rest of them and mark them as rejected. We never open the envelopes to see how the ballots were voted. We just hold those as rejected. Just in case there's some sort of election challenge related to that, we hold those until the election's closed, and we can then properly destroy them if there's no challenge. Okay, let's see the next mark. Some of this we've talked about before. I should have marked this one.
page?
Let's go to page 37. I know we've talked about this before, but draw your attention to the situation where a voter makes a mistake on their ballot, but it's not so bad that they need a new ballot. We've given them a way to make a correction for who they voted for in case they'd marked the wrong oval. And what we're going to do is allow them to do a strike-through to indicate that's not their intent. Their intent was actually, in this case, to vote for Mary Smith and vote yes. So that way, they don't have to go through this whole process of getting a whole nother ballot just because they made one little mistake.
Mr. Dunbar.
So, a little bit broad question, but I just watched the movie Recount. I watched that last week. And, I am a little curious. For our code in general, and I don't know if it comes from the state code, are we trying to divine intent for every ballot? Is that sort of the ultimate goal of our code here, or was it imposed upon us by the state one way or the other?
We closely track what the state does because the state's following what the courts have said will or won't work.
Okay.
So when the ballots are scanned, if the machine cannot read the ballot, it displays a scanned image, and it allows the election official to adjudicate that ballot on screen, and observers and watchers can look over their shoulder and see what they've done, and you can look at that and say, well, the machine has a tolerance level that you set. It says if there's this much of a mark inside the oval, that's a vote.
Yeah.
If it's anything less than that, it's a mismark, right, or a no vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can adjudicate those candidate by candidate if you need to, if it pops up, and then you have that image preserved, and what you did to it, there's a log that tracks. So if an election official makes one adjudication, but a supervisor says no, that's logged with that ballot.
Ms. Moser.
But I think it's important to, and maybe to respond somewhat to your question, this is a departure from what we've been doing in the past.
The ability to strike through, yes.
As of now, even if this was marked like this, it would be counted as an overvote, and we wouldn't give those votes to Mary Smith or Prop 1. Neither of them would count. So we have had a robust conversation in our group about this because looking closely at what other jurisdictions are doing, and because you do not have the ability to just get a new ballot, and this is something that happens with some level of regularity, and the importance of every vote counting, we really wanted to find a way to make sure. And what I've seen that I really like, and I hope to incorporate it, is the ballots have a small little picture of instructions demonstrating that you can do this if you do make a mistake. And I think we've had the conversation to include that on our ballots too.
Yeah, we're trying to get this. This hopefully will be on the ballot. If it's not on the ballot, it should certainly be part of the envelope package that they get. Somewhere on that package shows them exactly how to fill it out and what they can do if they make a mistake.
Would
Yeah.
it help to require initials be put on the strike-through line? I've seen other forms where you strike through it.
Yeah.
You require to put your initials on the strike-through line.
Yeah.
Double, so that's what you intend to do, take that one off.
We talked about it and did not go with that.
Because it would,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
it would identify
The
that's
voter.
your ballot, and we don't want to know.
And that would invalidate it, in fact, if you have identifying
I was
marks.
thinking that too, but
Yeah.
I was thinking what you were, and then, yeah.
Because there's some forms I've had to fill out where you can
Yeah.
draw a line and put your initials on it.
Ms. Jones.
When we get to the observers and poll watchers guide, which we'll bring to you, it has a couple of pages of examples in it, and we'll go through that. It is really fun, and we have had the privilege of going through it when we had the Ernie Hall race where there was a write-in candidate in West Anchorage, so we had to do a hand count because of the write-in, and so we are very good at this, and we the municipal attorney's office, Dennis at the time, set up a list of criteria for us, and so we had Nick Moe and Rick Moe and Mick No, and so we had a list of things that were acceptable and a list of things that were not acceptable.
And it was, did you say it was right after the Murkowski race by chance?
I
So you
missed
had it
that.
Had all that
Yeah.
as well, yeah.
Forrest, I actually got votes in that election. We wrote Dick Traney in there. I got votes in his election. Thank you.
So we do have some experience, and the guides are really good, but we want to incorporate that information here. But this is one of the most difficult decisions because it is obvious here what the voter intended. However, there are other parts of our code that would prohibit us from counting Mary Smith, and that's the part that says mark one oval if you mark, get a new ballot if you make a mistake. And so there's sort of Amanda and I have a little debate between the failure to follow instructions and what someone might think is common sense, but we think this is going to clarify that.
That's good.
Yeah, we should
Seems
probably,
fairly easily understood to me.
Mr. Peters.
what we should probably do there. I was just thinking maybe we should actually say don't initial in there, just to make
Yes.
sure it's clear, because people would have this natural tendency to
I would
initial
do it
off.
just
We should probably add it in there
Okay.
and say don't initial,
I think this is good, and this is what we,
Initial will invalidate your ballot.
something like that, yes, something that's pretty clear.
Because people are used to just initialing it, but I understand why, Barb.
this makes sense, and it's probably we should try and get people to do it in this way or get a new ballot. Practically, if it ever made a difference, I think like the Lisa example and the Nick Moe example, the court would tell you if you can define the intent, if I exit out instead of crossing, if I, there's a lot of ways I could indicate that to you, and I think if it made a difference, which it usually doesn't, you would be required to count those where it was clear, even if it wasn't this crossout. I mean, we can try and get people to do this, but if it ever is a close call and it is squigglied out, I don't know. I just think this is the way we ought to push them towards, but I'm not sure it's going to be binding.
So I have a question. Our machines, are they, and the ballots, are we going to be continuing to fill the oval out, or are we going to go to X in the box?
No, filling the oval.
Fill in the oval, we're staying with the oval.
Right.
Okay.
So, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Kropp, to address both of your issues, I agree with you. If somebody squiggles through it instead of slashes, there's going to be the adjudicator, the person that's trained, and the adjudicator is going to count the Mary Smith vote, whether it's squiggled or crossed through. Now, even though the instructions tell you to color in the oval, if you slash it or if you exit, it's going to end up in front of the adjudicator, and depending on how much ink is over that X is going to depend on whether we count it. If it's a dot, which could be, I think they
A
call
pen
that
rest.
a pen rest.
Yeah.
There you go. The pen rest will not count, but a slash or an X will. There's enough dots there that we would count that.
So you're trying to, in any way that they can communicate their intent to the person counting the ballot is going to be counted.
Subject to the guidelines that we have that identify what is or isn't a valid mark, and I don't think I have a copy of that with me.
If somebody puts a check mark next to a candidate's name and there's no check marks next to the opponent's name, we know who they were trying to vote for, right?
Let me-
Amanda here.
No,
Ms. Ledger.
so in response, so we had a lot of fun playing with the ballots and
How about with Dominion?
with Dominion.
Yeah,
So they brought the machine and they brought ballots for us to play with, and we got to do all sorts of things. And so if you had your candidates here and here's your ovals, we are going to set up the machine to count based on different things. And so you set your lowest level. So if it's anything under 5%, it's not going to count it. So if you
5%
have
of the
like
oval?
a
Right.
pen rest, it's not going to count it. But if you vote like this,
Might be 5%.
there's enough in there that it's going to count that.
Yes.
But if you have like a slightly bigger pen rest and this, it's going to come up for the adjudicator to see that there's two things marked because this is like 7% and this is 13%.
And the adjudicator will follow the guidelines that we have about what to do with that
And they'll
ballot.
see that this is a pen rest and that this is a check.
If a ballot comes in, there's only that pen rest, like you said, and the machine doesn't read it. Where does that ballot go? Does it go to the adjudicator, or does
Nope.
it kind of just wait for the time? If we do a recount, then we go and you look at the
If
images.
it's less than whatever our low level is that we
Yeah.
said, it's
Doesn't go to adjudication.
not going to count it.
It's not going to count it. It's not going to go to adjudication. But is there any mechanism
Yes.
during a recount process to go and find this ballot?
Yes, two different ways. Theoretically, you'll have all the paper ballots and you could hand count them. We don't want to do that because
Of course.
they're all scanned into the system. There's an image.
Right.
So all the images can be pulled up one by one, regardless of how they were previously adjudicated. And somebody can visually look at those and go, oh, okay, what do we do with that? It was below the 5%. It looks like a dot. You know, we can't divine voter intent from that. It's under the computer threshold. It doesn't match our guidelines. We're still going to treat it as a no vote or an empty cast in that race.
And the
'cause
other-
people aren't required to vote every election on the ballot.
Did they rest their pen or did they indicate something?
That's right. And then observers and watchers for the various different candidates can see that process happening, and they can say, hey, I want to challenge that ballot in court if they want to, and we can print out images of the ballots for submittal to the court.
Right. Okay.
So just real quick, I think this is the right thing to do, and you could do, I guess, do language, which I think would be more legally accurate, that says if we can divine your intent when you cross it out, we'll do it. But I think chaos ensues kind of from that. I think you'd rather tell them what you want them to do, but I think know that other things than this in a close race are likely to be counted. Other indications, I didn't mean that, I meant this.
And we see that already. I was chuckling earlier, I think, when Forrest was talking, because someone voted by mail and they voted for something that they didn't want to, and they cut out they like X-Acto knifed out the circle. It was the coolest thing that I saw.
Why don't we just use pencils?
So then they could mark in the other, now that they've,
Yeah.
Wait,
and you counted them.
you can use a pencil, right, with an eraser?
No.
You have to use pen on these. Okay, that's good to know. And that would be very clearly displayed, like, do not mark this with pencil,
Yes.
mark
Yep.
this with
Dark
pen.
ink, preferably
Okay.
black.
Number 2 pencils, not allowed. Ms. Tucker?
Isn't that part of what you're talking about, divining the intent is dependent on compliance with instructions? I mean, that's your first key to divining the intent is, did they follow instructions, to what
Right.
extent? So I think that's why it's important to have a rule, because that's your chief guide.
Right, and here's the instructions, number 5, right under the oval marks. The mark shall be counted only if it is substantially inside the oval provided or touching the oval so as to indicate clearly the voter intended the particular oval to be designated.
Yeah.
That's the instruction, basically. And you're right, you know, part of the fallback is you're supposed to fill in the oval. You came close or you didn't come close, you gotta make a judgment call about what to
Right,
do with that,
and
the
that's
machine
what
pops it up.
that
Yeah.
the machine's popping it up.
Yep.
But if you don't have the rule to help you see that they complied, then you're undoing the basic premise of just going to meaning B, right? For divining intent. So I mean, that's what I'm saying is you really need to have the compliance rule like you have here and kind of stick to that, because that's the person's basic guide.
Mr. Training?
Amanda, so we're going to have detailed instructions on the type of pen, not pencil, we can use. Blue or black, which is it, or both?
do you have, or do I have all the examples back in the office? Sorry.
We have gotten a lot of information from other jurisdictions, and we are really working on developing some clear instructions. And one thing that I already mentioned and I really like is the information on the ballot itself. So I mentioned the little pictorials on the ballot, and we've seen a lot of that stuff. And we won't do it. I think it'll make it helpful.
Because people use different pens, everybody's used a number 2 pencil. Want to make sure we're not disqualifying people because they used a red pen.
We're going to encourage that, but all these are going to pass. We're
Yes.
gonna- yeah.
No swastikas though. Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson, sorry, I only have 10 minutes left.
Yes, we gotta-
Is there something really important here that we
Only
for?
one or two quick things. Section 48, page 40. 2885-040, certification of the election. We've added in the municipal clerk in A, B, and C so that the municipal clerk, just like the election commission, can bring things to the attention of the assembly during the certification process. That's basically just to give you a heads up that it's not entirely dependent on the election commission taking action, but the municipal clerk can bring things out and report to you as well. And then the last thing is that, I just wanted to give you a heads up, the last few pages deal with some election by mail code that you already have that we wrote, 3 years ago now, I suppose. That was for special elections for service areas. So I haven't deleted it, I just sort of updated it. It probably could be deleted later, but I felt for right now, let's just
Keep it in.
keep it where it is, and just update it a little bit. So that's all I did with that. And that's largely
This is
me
the-
getting the highlights.
This is the section that we're using for the Wren Streetlight Service Area special election that you approved last night.
And I just wanted to add, we are rolling this out to our stakeholders group tomorrow, and of course the committee members have all been invited, and we hope you are able to attend. 155 and more pizza.
What was the two-person attestation thing? There was that, if you couldn't make a mark, but wasn't there also a sort of day of, you could deliver the ballot to somebody who couldn't make it to the polls?
We have special needs voting
Yeah.
currently in our code, and it's not going anywhere. And that is if you are
Bedridden or whatever.
hospital or whatever, we have, and there's also, organizations that send out ballots, and anyone can pick up a ballot.
And those require the two-signature thing?
They do not require 2 signatures. The
They used
voter
to.
signs it, and the personal representative signs it.
And if they're a competent person who can't get to the polls, I remember the obligatory story here, but 96 running against Don Smith, I'm voting, Don runs in and is trying to get a ballot to a woman who broke her leg and can't make it to the poll. And he needs two voters in the district to attest it, or at least registered voters.
I think that's not in our code, and I think that maybe this.
It's a state election.
But the state's the same on special needs. We have their stuff straight from them, and it's since 2010, which is all I can speak to elections. It has not.
Page 23, section 30, 2860-040, special needs voting. Page 23, middle of the page, that describes, so we're updating a little bit, and we did the updates here based on our conversation with the stakeholders group that had representation from folks involved in ADA type issues, because we wanted to get their input about whether this was workable, too onerous, not strict enough, etc. So this is what we've done to update that.
Okay, but that's,
So if you look at page 24, if the voter is unable to sign, make a mark and have a witness. The representative is not the witness,
no.
but they do sign it as well, so there ends up being 2.
I know we did this process, but I guess
The
it
person
doesn't
getting the
matter.
special needs ballot is able to sign the ballot themselves, they'll just.
That's not an issue.
It's not an issue,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
In your case, was the person really a special needs person?
Well, they
Who
were-
just broke their leg that day or whatever that
They were
is?
competent but couldn't get to the polls.
That's good, that's special
fine.
needs.
Because I think we've taken stuff to the hospital for people who are in a car accident the day of the election.
We take it to people in long-term care facilities every election. I mean, and the code doesn't specify, to what degree you're unable, and we don't ask questions.
Okay, quickly, the end of that story is, so Donna and I attest the two candidates that she's voting for, one of us, so you don't know which, but she was a registered Democrat, so I thought there was a decent shot. So, you don't have anything much to do on election day anyway, so Don and I went and he did it, and then he ran it back, and I was sitting with her. He had to get the ballot, bring it back, then she, and we're talking, and she says, Eric, Chancey's son, right? And I thought that may be good, because Democrat and thing, and I said yes, and she said, oh, and I'm like, do you know him? Yeah, he represented my ex-husband in our divorce. So I just got to sit there for another 10 minutes. You're going to mark that down, aren't you? I got to go. Look at the time. Yes.
What I would like to do on behalf of the municipal clerk's office is see what I can do to get you in this car today. So, the idea being that we'd like to get this introduced in front of the current assembly so we don't have to go through this whole educational process with a new assembly next time around. If the committee is okay with that, then what we'd like to do is have the committee sponsor this for introduction.
Make a motion to bring this thing forward to the Assembly.
I will say, can I ask a question
Well, the
before we
members.
vote on this?
Okay.
I wanted to ask
This is
two questions, substantive questions. So the first is,
Which I agree with.
is there some way for people, voters, to double check that their vote has been received? That is, I think there's you drop it off and then it goes out into the ether and you don't know if it
Yes
they
and no.
got it up.
Yes and
Yes and
no.
no.
Yeah, so it's a good lawyer answer, but I didn't say it depends. So, we have an RFP that's going to go out for mailing and printing, and part of that RFP is to get them to include the ability to do intelligent barcoding. And if at some point we can afford whatever this system is, it would allow a voter to log in and see where their ballot is, or their envelope
Just has
is in
been
process.
received.
Right.
Okay.
Right now, we're planning on having tracking, so we know when it went out and when we got it back. But we're not anticipating able to buy right out of the gate the additional component to allow the voter
Okay.
to log in, because that depends on an expense, and we don't know what that's going to look like yet.
I think that's an important system, but if it takes more investment in the future, that's fine. I guess the second thing is then, remind me again how early voting works in this system again. So how early...
There would be conceptually, there's not going to be any early voting as a separate designation. It's vote by mail, it opens
Right.
3 days out, or 3 weeks out, and then it closes.
And when do the drop boxes open?
They'll
3 weeks
open
out?
within that first week.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
ideally the same
21
day,
days.
everything's timed right.
Yeah.
And the accessible voter centers, when do they?
7 days out.
1 week.
7 days. Okay. So we have 3 weeks. Or about 3 weeks where you can drop into a Dropbox, and then a week at the accessible
Special
voting
assistance,
center,
yeah.
and then you can always mail it.
So if someone shows up to the voting center because they didn't get their ballot, they've got, it's open a week before the election, they can say, I didn't get one, and they wanted one.
And those
Plus the call
timeframes-
center, plus coming to the clerk's office
Right.
here.
And those timeframes are, like from other jurisdictions, pretty standard. 3 weeks and a week.
Well, the accessible vote center, I didn't really look at other jurisdictions in terms of hours when they open, but the 3 weeks out seems to be pretty common.
Okay. Okay.
To address Forrest's questions, we're going to do a cost-benefit analysis. We understand in Denver that they had sky-high numbers of calls into the call center.
Did you get my vote?
Exactly. So Jackie is working really hard on this, and we're going to measure and document all those calls. And if I can, the idea that I've got here is that if the cost of staffing the call center is, if we can reduce that cost by adding, spending $100,000 on a Track My Ballot program, I'm going to ask you to allow us to invest in that.
Mr. Trini, just want to make sure we get a vote to send this on to the Assembly.
I
Who
second.
got
You seconded it? Everybody in favor?
Sponsors.
Yes.
Aye.
So you'll be individually listed as
So this is going to be
sponsors
sponsored by the committee,
by the individual members.
each individual
Yeah.
member of the committee. Okay.
Okay.
All right, great.
As amended.
Thank you guys for the work, Dennis,
Right.
thanks a lot.
There's one little change we were gonna
Anything
make.
else
Yeah, there's a couple
on
small
our agenda
changes, yeah.
before we want to go?
And I'll hopefully see you all tomorrow at the
Stakeholders.
I want to state for the record that I was being facetious when I said it was okay that his son voted in Washington. That's horrible and wrong. Every voter that doesn't live in the state of Alaska should be purged. That doesn't intend to live in the state of Alaska.
That's all right, I have 6 sons, so they all vote.